bring this emergency meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dunbar?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dyson? Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Ms. Salatel?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. If we could please do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Hall, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The clerk has distributed an agenda. The agenda has a typo on it in that it states we were going to begin at 6 p.m. This emergency meeting was going to be called whenever we finished the special meeting. It was not time-bound. Just for clarification, I'd like my vice chair to make a clarifying amendment to the agenda.
Move to modify the time on the agenda to 5:35. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any opposition to that motion? All right. So that has been amended. At this time, I'd like the municipal attorney to briefly read the relevant section of code and walk us through the procedures for an emergency meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the emergency meetings provision is found within Anchorage Municipal Code 2-30.030. Part E references emergency meetings. It says, in an emergency, a special meeting without notice shall be a legal meeting if all members are present or there is a quorum and all absent members have waived in writing or by email the required notice. The waiver may be either before or after the time of the meeting. The waiver shall be attached to and made a part of the record for that meeting. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to comment on that as well.
Sure.
So in this case, we will need a waiver from Assemblymember Dyson, but that in order for the meeting to be legal, but that waiver does not have to have been obtained before the meeting happens. So, and that's explicit in code. So we need to receive a waiver from him afterwards in order for this to be legal.
What's that? And I'll note for the record that I reached out to Mr. Dyson to see if he would attend this meeting. I believe he was on an email that went out about this meeting as well. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And we have not heard back from Mr. Dyson, but hopefully we're able to get a hold of him and get that waiver after the fact. But as the municipal attorney stated, it does not have an impact on our ability to conduct a legal meeting at this time. Okay? Anything else, Mr. Ogle?
No, but I'm happy to answer other questions, Mr. Chair, about the procedures that we're using. I know they're a little bit unusual. We've had several attorneys looking at them to make sure that we're doing things by the book here.
Any questions before we move on to the main item? All right. And for those on the phone, please just speak up if you'd like to ask a question. We are now on item 4A, resolution number AR 2020-85, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly extending the declaration of civil emergency COVID-19 issued by the mayor of the municipality of Anchorage on March 12, 2020, introduced by myself. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item?
Yes. Move to amend. I have just a couple of amendments to add.
I'm sorry. Folks could speak up a little bit so folks on the phone could hear.
And 2 or 3 of them are nominal, 3 of them are substantive. I don't know, I'll probably do them all at once. On line 15, I would add, whereas on March 12, 2020, the first positive case in Alaska was diagnosed in Anchorage.
Sorry, which line was that?
Line 15.
Line 15 on page 1.
So I would add, whereas on March 12, 2020, the first positive case in Alaska was diagnosed in Anchorage. Then on line 41, where it says the municipality is authorized to request assistance from the state of Alaska, I would add after Alaska and the federal government.
Restate the line, please.
It is line 41, after the word Alaska, I would add and the federal government. And then finally on the last page, both line 38 and line 44, I would change the date from April 14th to March 31st, which is the last day of this month, also a Tuesday, just 3 weeks. And I would ask for a second. I'm sorry, what? To March 31st.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that amendment? Ms. Quinn Davidson, then Mr. Rivera, then Mr. Weddleton, and then the municipal attorney.
I think Mr. Rivera, well, I'll be fast. I was just going to ask the mayor's team to talk about why they selected April 14th. Presumably there's a purpose for that date.
Okay. Would you like to speak to that?
Through the chair, I'm happy to. We wanted to pick a date that the assembly was meeting and that eliminated the need to sort of do a renewal. The assembly has the power to end an emergency declaration early, so extending it out that long isn't necessary. If it's the will of the assembly to do it on a night, have it end on a night when you're already meeting, that's earlier. The administration can live with that, so this was picked to be around 30 days from today, and on the closest day that was an assembly meeting. That is how we arrived at April 14th, and
So I'll just speak to that. I commit to my colleagues that if you pass this amendment, I will call a special meeting on that day, the 31st, which I believe is a Tuesday night. Do you have any follow-up steps, Quinn Davidson?
So we would have to call a special meeting rather than just dealing with it at our regular scheduled meeting that's on the 31st?
No, there is no regular scheduled meeting.
Oh,
So we have a
I thought it
big
was.
gap because of the election, the 24th to the 14th, we have no regularly scheduled
Got it.
meetings.
Okay.
We have an unusually long gap.
Maybe Chris can talk about why he wants us to have another meeting.
I just had a conversation with the chair, and in the conversation, it seems reasonable to keep ourselves in the loop as much as possible and not extend it out too far. And everything changes after the election, and who knows? And so I think it's just good for us to have our pulse on the agenda between now and then. And so I think it's reasonable for us. We can gather and continue this. We did it once before. It doesn't take a big act for us to do that. And so I just want to ensure that we stay inside of this process as much as possible.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Let me just speak in opposition to changing the date here. I appreciate the desire of the Assembly to stay engaged with what's going on, and as you all know, that's been the practice of this administration, to keep everybody engaged. But if we are going to be in a position where the Assembly and individual members are going to peer over our shoulder every time we do something, if our ability to move quickly is at all compromised, that hurts our ability to perform the mission here. And so I understand that the members want to stay engaged and stay informed, and we'll absolutely do that. But 3 weeks is not enough time for us to move on things to the extent that we might need to. A month is, and a month of review is plenty of opportunity. But let me just reiterate, slowing us down hurts our ability to perform the mission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's see, so I want to go back to our queue here, although it's to speak to the amendment. Mr. Rivera, do you want to speak to the amendment?
Yes, that's why I got it. So first, I would like Mr. Constant to repeat the provisions in the amendment, please.
Yes, technically, one would be to add a whereas clause that states that today, that an actual case was diagnosed in Anchorage. So that's the first one. The second one is on line 41 after the word Alaska, it's and the federal government. And then the last ones are on the second page, lines 38 and line 44. And since I was granted the floor, I just would speak to the fact that it's debatable whether we are all in the loop or looking over anyone's shoulders, but what isn't debatable is that we have a reasonable right to have checking in on this, and the best way to do that is to set that time and work our way toward it. And with all respect, Mr. Mayor, it is not an effort to challenge your authority. It is, in fact, an effort to support your authority and stay in the loop.
But, Mr. Chair, if I could respond to that.
Yeah, Mr.
And this is why I don't come to assembly meetings or speak in assembly meetings, because I don't want to engage in debate. But this is not a question of my authority. This is a question of the municipality being able to do the things that are necessary to protect the safety and well-being of the people of the municipality. And if the limited resources in the mayor's office are diverted by continually coming back to the assembly in order to perform the functions that are necessary to, on a regular basis, extend this emergency order, then our ability is compromised. And I know the assembly is as interested as we are in making sure that the safety and well-being of people is protected. And if there are specific questions at any time, we have never been shy about sharing that information with you. But I think to have to come back after 3 weeks before we've had a chance to get things up and going is incredibly problematic.
Okay. Mr. Rivera, do you have any more?
I do, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I then a question again to Mr. Constant on the second change he was proposing. So this specific whereas speaks to the proclamation of emergency that that the mayor issued, and so you're making a change in the language. Would that be better? Because I'm assuming this language is taken straight from that proclamation. So I think it might be better than if you went to do that, what you're suggesting, just put it in a Section 3 resolve.
Okay. I think that would be fine. I just don't want to limit our granting of authority to the mayor in his emergency capacity to only the state of Alaska when I know our federal delegation is on point and ready to help. And so let us grant that power.
So yeah, I would suggest then that amendment to the amendment be made. And then specifically speaking to the time, I would respectfully, Mr. Mayor, suggest that this isn't the assembly trying to peer over the administration's shoulder, rather doing our fiscal due diligence. And so what was surprising here was that this went so long without the idea of reporting back to the assembly. So if there is, I would support it as written if there was some provisions that stated the administration will report back to the assembly at some date certain. But I do think going 30 days is too long.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mrs. Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the amendment to the amendment, if there is one.
Well, there actually hasn't been one yet, but let's potential. Speak to the amendment, if you would.
Okay, so talking about editing the part that directly quotes from the proclamation of emergency is difficult because the Assembly's power is to extend emergency proclamation, but not actually to change the emergency proclamation. Certainly the Assembly could add things into whereases, or when it's not quoting the emergency proclamation itself, make other statements. Also, substantive, so that's sort of mechanically on it. Substantively on it, the state's, the municipality's language referencing the state borrows from prior emergency declarations and follows the normal practice, which is a chain of we ask from the state asks from the feds, but does not mean that we are not in communication with our federal counterparts seeking relief. It's just the chain of how we do it, and that is why we chose that wording again today. We did think about should we be changing it and stuck with our precedent based on that practice, but it does not mean that we don't have an interest in federal funding.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Given that, do you want to make any change to your amendment? You're the mover.
Yeah, I think that we would be wise to speak to our relationship with the federal government, but I will concede that having only received this at the beginning of this meeting at 5:35 and making a quick read, it's very challenging to be thorough and comprehensive. So we can remove that and maybe come back to it in a moment. So as the mover, I would strike that.
Who's the seconder? Is it Mr. Welton? Do you agree to remove that provision? Okay. So the amendment now has two portions. The first is adding the whereas clause regarding the first positive case diagnosed in Anchorage. The second changes the last whereas so that the date switches from April 14th to March 31st. I have Mr. Welton and Ms. Zalatello in the queue. Oh, in both sections. I apologize. Mr. Welton.
Actually, my question revolved around that federal government thing, so we're good.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if the mover of the amendment would be willing to set the date for the proclamation aside, move the one, and then consider moving the second piece as a second amendment. I think that there's some concerns about the date, and I guess I would like to consider the two items separately.
So that would be a motion to bifurcate the two items?
I second that motion.
Madam Clerk, do we need a motion to bifurcate an amendment like that?
A motion to bifurcate is appropriate if that's what the body wants to do, unless, but it is an appropriate motion.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion to bifurcate? Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree and would prefer to go about it this way because I too would like to talk more about date and what else the administration could propose for keeping the assembly up to date, if not through a special meeting.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Folks on the phone, do you have any opposition to the motion to bifurcate?
No.
No.
Okay, I'll ask for unanimous consent. Seeing opposition, the motion is bifurcated. We are now in the first portion, adding a whereas clause regarding a positive case diagnosed in Anchorage. Any further discussion on that? Oh, Mr. Buckner.
Mr. Chair, I would just recommend that we add the word presumptive in front of positive, as that is actually what has happened at this point.
Yep, that's a good point. So, any opposition to that from the motion mover or the second? Okay. So now we'll read, whereas on March 12th, 2020, the first presumptive positive case was diagnosed in Anchorage. All right. So let's please vote on that motion.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla?
Yes.
Mr. Weddle?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Zolotel?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, so we are now on the second amendment regarding changing the date.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Zolotel.
could I add an amendment to the amendment then, please?
You could.
So following the section 1, the end of that sentence, I would recommend, and this is regardless of which date it ultimately ends up being, the administration agrees to report to the Assembly weekly as to any significant changes or updates that should be conveyed to the public, period. And I'll take any helpful edits. That's a little clunky. I apologize.
It could be its own section, and it might just suggest that the administration shall update the Assembly weekly.
Okay.
Sure. It could just say weekly and leave it at that. I would be okay with that.
So the administration shall update the Assembly weekly. I mean, we can just keep it simple like that. And that will be in section 3, or new section 2.
I actually think it should go below section 1 there, because it's directly related to, I mean, to me, it's directly related to the time. You know, we've extended it. We've approved, or will be approving these powers under the emergency proclamation. I mean, it all goes together. So it's either an addition on section 1 or a new section 2.
Let's keep it as an addition to section 1, only because then we don't have to do any relabeling or anything like that. So we'll just have a new sentence after 10 o'clock p.m. that states the administration shall report to the Assembly weekly. Mr. Weddleton.
What if we could amend that? Because what is that report? It's a report weekly on emergency measures taken under ordinance 2020, whichever it is, under this emergency proclamation.
So the administration shall report to the Assembly weekly on, say that again?
Weekly on emergency measures taken under this proclamation of emergency.
Mrs. Vogel.
Through the chair, we have a concern about triggering Open Meetings Act requirements and requiring meetings through this. But so long as we're sort of on the same page that it's not a discussion forum, then it doesn't need to cause the same problem as requiring a special meeting. And we certainly envision a lot of communication about what actions the municipality is taking. I just want to be clear that what we're talking about here, if it's envisioned to be a back and forth discussion, would really run foul of the Open Meetings Act.
Unless I call I have to call a work session, basically, to it. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They could inform us electronically. I mean, we don't have to have a special meeting. Do we need to add that in there?
Oh, I don't think so. I think that's implied.
Okay, sure.
I think her question was slightly different, her point. And I think her point she was making was that a weekly briefing would be overmuch if it required the administration to come and debate the actions of the administration in response to the emergency. And I think that's a reasonable position to stake. That's okay. A report in writing would be fine. That's why the idea of having this terminate early and then come back and reappropriate or reauthorize it, or come up with some other mechanism where we can, in the interim, in the course of a month, have a discussion, a meaningful discussion, would be reasonable.
Mr. Weldon?
My intent was not that we would have a meeting from Ms. Altel's wording and mine, because the whole idea of this thing is we all scatter and not meet. Do you want more wording in here to clarify that?
Through the chair, I don't know that I need more wording. I sort of wanted to confirm the understanding that we have opposition to the idea of more meetings for the same reason that we've asked for this to be extended, but also we do have other assembly meetings planned where, and work sessions where I absolutely expect that that's what's going to happen. So I think that this is already in the works to be getting this kind of update.
Yeah, well, we'll follow from Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Gates.
I want to brief on this. These ideas, and this will take administration time to tell us what they're doing, and that's going to slow you down. But we get asked what's going on, and we need to know. And if we don't know what you're doing, we're going to give different information, and we're all going to mess things up. People will be confused. The more we learn about what you're doing, the better. And we have a good working relationship, so I don't think this is unusual, but we need to know what you're doing because we get asked continuously. And if we say something slightly different from what the administration is doing or tells, then they don't trust any of us.
Mr. Chair, let me just point out that there are bi-weekly assembly meetings in which occasion the assembly is free to ask any questions they want. There are all kinds of special meetings that the assembly has. So there are plenty of occasions for having interrogatories to us. We put out plenty of information. We will continue to do that. We are a phone call away. Most of you, in fact, if any of you don't have my personal phone, I'd be surprised. We're easy to find. And so I understand the concern. I understand the importance of being able to convey to the public what's going on. But this thing is moving really quickly. And if we want to make sure that our resources are focused on conveying to the public and to you as you have special requests what's going on. But if we prepare a request for a Friday meeting and events change on Thursday, it's just going to be too problematic.
Thank you. Mr. Gates, and then we've got Meg, Ms. Alato, Ms. Kennedy, and Mr. Constant in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest if the intent is just to get a weekly I guess, written report submitted to the assembly, not work session, so forth. That language such as, if you want to add language, submit a weekly report or at least a weekly report. Using the word submit is used in other code contexts for submitting the municipal budget and the school district budget, and it's not at a meeting, it's just sent to you by email or so forth. If you wanted to clarify at least the language and what your intent is.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Ms. Zolotel, you were next in the queue, and this is your amendment. Is that something you'd be open to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. The intent here is kind of, as Mr. Weddleton has indicated, so that we have the most salient facts that we need to be discussing with our constituents. And if the administration feels that they need to see us in person, they're never shy about asking us to gather. So I think it's fairly workable, and I don't think that it being weekly is really too much. As the mayor himself said, this is an ever-changing situation, and we are often on the front lines in terms of with our constituents and the public. And I think it is extremely important that we are giving out accurate and consistent information. And what Mr. Gates has suggested, and as Mr. Weddleton has indicated, I think those things will cover that. And then may or may not require us to have to actually get together all that often to meet about this beyond our bi-weekly meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. The proposal is to change the amendment so that it reads, the administration shall submit a weekly report, and then continue with Mr. Weddleton's language on emergency measures taken under this proclamation of emergency. Who was the second on this amendment? Okay, so for you as the mover, Ms. Zolotel, and you as the second, Mr. Weddleton, do you agree to that form of the amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
The clerk is scratching her head.
Ms. Jones?
Okay. I had originally that the motion was agrees to report to the Assembly weekly, but it's evolved quite a bit from there. And
Yeah.
Mr. Gates commented about the term submit.
Yes.
Okay.
So now it reads, the administration shall submit a weekly report on the emergency measures taken under this proclamation of emergency. Okay. All right. So we've got people in the queue. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, I agree to the idea that we'd like to have some kind of a report, submitted weekly, but at the same time, it might be daily. I don't want to find out a week later that we've lost half of our emergency responders that've gone out on sick leave. I don't want to have to find out a week later that maybe we've got a ship of shipments that's not coming in. So anyway, some of this stuff, for the very reason that the mayor says, this stuff is just really spiraling up very quickly. And for all of us to have the best up-to-date information, I don't want to think that we can only find out at the end of a week how the week went, because there are going to be things that people need to know on a regular basis. I've been really impressed by what the Anchorage School District has done. They have informed their parents almost daily, even during the week of spring break. And that their information hasn't changed a lot until today. It changed hugely. But so I hate to pigeonhole us into the idea of just having a weekly report when there could be something that explodes and we need to know pretty much right away. So I hesitate to use that word weekly. Maybe it needs to be more based on the idea of how things fluctuate or big things happen. Maybe that needs to be more of what we're really trying to get at, for the very purpose that both Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Zolotel said, is we're being asked by the public as well. And I don't want to be the last one to know. I don't want to have somebody email me and say, hey, did you hear what KTUU just said? And with something like this, I think that's really important, that we get that information so that we know it comes from the right source with the real facts. And then we can basically answer things about, yes, that's true, or no, that's not true. So anyway, I probably made my point.
Thank you. Let's see here. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So just a slight bit of misunderstanding has been communicated around the table. We don't have bi-weekly meetings. The charter requires we have 2 meetings a month. And we are actually at the weird time of the year when the meetings are completely scrambled, out of order, out of time. And so we really have one meeting in the next 5 weeks. And that's on this coming Tuesday, the 24th. Then there's not another meeting till the 14th. And so it's perfectly reasonable for us in the interim to have a meeting. So we should be really clear with ourselves. We don't have a meeting every 2 weeks to update on this stuff. And we will be hearing regularly. I do appreciate these continuous updates that we've been getting, sometimes before we need them, sometimes after we need them.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mrs. Wooley, do you want to respond to that? And then go on to Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have another meeting already scheduled, with a special meeting. It's for next Friday.
That's true.
Are you proposing then that we make the emergency order and then? I don't think that's what any of us want. We're talking about an in-between point between when we create this and 5 weeks from now.
Thank you. Yes.
Through the chair, no, that wasn't my suggestion. I was just responding to we only have one meeting scheduled in the next 5 weeks.
Let me just ask you, what do you want to know?
Can I answer?
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair? Thank you. That's kind of the point. We don't necessarily know a question to ask you. If I hear something and want to come say, hey, can you clear me up on this, tell me what's really going on, that's one thing. But the things that I don't know about what's going on, if I don't know what kind of a question to ask or when, then I just don't know. But your office is going to have all of that information coming in from all directions, and I understand what a juggling act that has to be. But at the same time, you're going to be the point of contact for everybody, and you have to figure out how to disseminate that so that we know what's going on too. And then we will know a question to ask if we have more questions.
Thank you. I have Ms. Quinn Davidson in the queue, and then Ms. LaFrance, Ms. Zolotel, and Mr. Peterson. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, I think we're all on the same page. We just want to share information. And so I don't really like the idea of a submitted report that indicates I need to sit down and spend a bunch of time writing something. Maybe we have an in-person meeting. Maybe the mayor calls one of us, and then other people call other people. I think we need to maintain flexibility and have a little trust, and just expect that you guys will report to us, and we can write flexible language like Crystal suggested to do that. So I think we're all on the same page. We're a good team. Let's come up with some language that provides us the flexibility to work together.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was originally going to suggest regarding the language that, minimum weekly or as needed or more often as needed report, but I share the same concern as Ms. Quinn Davidson. The intent is not to have an onerous additional burden. And then I'm thinking, Mr. Mayor, you probably don't want 11 different people texting you all the time.
That would be a reduction.
A reduction? Oh, well, I meant just this body. I'm sure it's much more. But a question, I guess, to you and Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm assuming you are having regular communications on this, and one option might be for the chair to work with the clerk's office too. I mean, Mr. Constant's shaking his head no. I mean, we have to have some formalized communication structures on our end. I mean, clearly the city is putting out a lot of information.
So in the last couple of days, myself and Mr. Burleton have been working with the clerk's office and with the municipal attorney to try to, we've had our own sort of parallel tracks where we have been scheduling these meetings, and we did a press release, and then the mayor's team had a press conference, and they have a variety of actions too. But usually we get the information at the same time you do, with the sort of large-scale push-outs of information. I guess I would say that, we scheduled this emergency meeting in 3 hours. So the notion that we are a significant stumbling block to the administration in terms of time, I don't think really bears out. I mean, we are considering something that they gave to us an hour ago. And so I think we're able to act quickly. But in terms of information, I think that there is a good flow right now, back and forth. But I personally am in favor of the opportunity to renew sometime before April 14th. which is similar to what happened during the earthquake as well. You know, we didn't push the powers out indefinitely, we renewed them. And this body has been very cooperative and very flexible in working with the administration to do that.
May I just follow up?
Yeah.
And I wasn't saying we should do away with the report idea or extend the date back to April 14th. I was suggesting that in the same way that you, Mr. Middleton, meet with the administration before meetings to go over big events, that maybe some kind of daily quick briefing with the administration, and then you could give a heads up to the rest of us if there's some expected new development in the same way that you do with agenda items or other things that are coming. But I don't want to get too off topic at this. It just came up how we communicate and work as a team, as Ms. Quinn Davidson said, in a way where we don't overburden each other.
I think that, if I can answer that, I think that the idea of a written report has some benefit, if only because it's concrete, it's weekly, it's clear. On the other hand, if we need to instead schedule work sessions or special meetings to have a face-to-face, I will do that, through this period. When we have an emergency declaration, we've given the mayor, or we've re-given essentially the mayor extraordinary powers for a number of weeks. During that period, I will call a work session or a special meeting, basically at the drop of a hat, within public notice requirements, as assembly members want and as the administration wants. Yeah, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, so I'm just going to add one more layer to why we need to deal with this on the 31st. I'd initially thought that Friday, which was the 3rd, but in discussions with the chair, the 31st became the date. So if you look at the meeting we just had, we have an ordinance that discusses how we can participate by telephone. We have an ordinance that works to preserve the integrity of an election that occurs on the 7th of April. We have really, other than a meeting scheduled to discuss these items, no opportunity scheduled and concretely in place to, as we slam into that election that's coming, and then after that everything changes. Everything changes. Who knows who's going to be sitting around this table? Who knows what prevailing attitude is going to be? What the nightmare in the world or not is going to be? Whether one of us is going to be laid up in the hospital or worse. And so I think it is wise on our behalf not to push out so far that we enter into the final stage of that contest not having our bearings. And so if for no other reason, the meeting on the 31st is to help us set our bearings as we enter a brave new world.
I apologize, I got a little bit out of order here. Ms. Zolotel, you were in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So similarly, I think the point that Ms. LaFrance made, I don't want us to overwhelm the administration with emails and questions. And if we know that updates are coming regularly, I think that will be helpful, because we will get emails and questions. And if we know when those answers are coming, we can kind of figure out good timing on that, because we need to know. Similarly, we don't know what the plan will be for community councils. At least I don't know. I haven't seen anything come through from the FCC. Mr. Rivera and I have 3 or 4 next week, and we'll be asked questions either way, if community council happens or not. And so I think having a weekly report structure, whether that is verbal or written, I would personally love to have something written, even if it's bullet points, so I can refer back to it over and over again. I think is really important. And the more we have this conversation and this debate, I tend to agree with Mr. Constant about the timing on the date, because we're really going to be a source for information for the public. I very much appreciate the administration. I don't want to get in its way, but I also don't want to give out information that contradicts in any way. And I would really like to get the information directly from the administration versus laying that responsibility on any one member to then turn around and convey it all out to us. It could certainly be a single point of contact for sure, but I just don't want to have anything where something could be lost in translation in terms of one of us getting it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to point out that the administration and the mayor are as a full-time communications officer, and I believe there'll be information disseminated regularly as this situation warrants and as developments happen in this health emergency. I believe they're going to keep us in the loop. I would hope that they might let us know the information at least a few minutes before they send it out to the general public, but that would be up to them. But I haven't had a problem communicating with this administration in the last 5 years, and I don't expect problems in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Weddleton?
The mayor asked, what do we want to know? I have a short list just thinking, and I don't know if it'll come, but one would be, critical supply shortages like masks or whatever, if something comes up. This is just brainstorming. Where are we going to put people who are quarantined, right? You can buy a place, rent it. What are we going to do? Sullivan Arena? We should know. We'll be asked. How about the homeless? If there's no social separation at Brother Francis or Beans Cafe, we got an issue there. What are we going to do with that? We want to know testing results, people testing. Do we have test kits? Staff sicknesses, is clerk's office closing down? What's happening in your office? Is payroll? If stuff's hitting, we hear from municipal employees, and we should know what's going on if departments are closing. Building closures, work changes because of it, event cancellations, things like that. But we need to know, and if we don't, we'll give wrong information, and it's just people don't trust us already. We need to be very careful.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. A question for the municipal attorney, maybe Dean as well. Is it within our power to have an executive session for some of these items? Because I imagine some of these items are not things that you would want to broadcast to the world in a way until it was ready and appropriate to communicate to the world. And so, are some of these items legal to be briefed in executive session?
Would you like to speak to that, Ms. Vogel or Mr. Bockenstadt?
I'll take it. So I think it would depend on what the items are.
Of course.
And there aren't, it doesn't fit into one of the neatest items of things that are appropriate to go into executive session, but I'm also maybe not thinking creatively about what piece of information we're talking about. I think there's a plan to be pretty transparent about a lot of things that are happening, so I haven't thought about what are the secrets yet, and if there are secrets that are for very important reasons, that does get into the case law of when you get to go into executive session. So I think it would need a fact-specific determination on whether that was appropriate or possible.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Any other discussion? Right now we have Mr. Constant's amendment, which changes the date to March 31st and has an additional amendment to it. Actually, we can vote on the additional amendment to the amendment, which was the additional language added by Ms. Zolotel and Mr. Weddleton that would require submission of a weekly report. So right now we're talking about the amendment to the amendment about the submission of the weekly report. Is there any additional discussion about that? Does anyone want to change that language? Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if this does it, and I'm trying to listen and adjust this as needed. So rather than prescribe weekly reports, this is what I have written down. The administration shall submit regular reports to the Assembly on any emergency measures taken under AO 2020-85 as this public health emergency evolves. And that basically gets to, I think, what Ms. Kennedy wanted, which is, as this evolves, what's the latest and greatest? And that doesn't mean, it could mean weekly, it could mean daily, it could mean hourly.
Okay. Before we go further, Ms. Zolotel, is that language acceptable to you?
Just a moment. Can you read it one more time, Mr. Rivera?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the administration shall submit regular reports to the Assembly on any emergency measures taken under AO 2020-85 as this public health emergency evolves.
And that would be instead of any kind of any specific time requirement?
Yeah, this is separate of the time ending for the emergency.
No, I think she meant separate from like weekly and a regular.
Oh, yes,
basis.
it does get rid of the weekly time requirement.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I'm okay having someone else ask a question. I'm digesting that. Just a minute.
Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you say 2025? Or something about 25? I don't see that on any of our numbers, but maybe I'm just...
I just put the title of the ordinance that we're discussing right now.
But that's 85.
Yeah, I said AO 2020-85
Oh,
is
I
what
think
I
it's
said.
25. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Ms. Zolotel?
I would prefer to keep that less than time period in there, just because if there's no news, there's no news, but I would like to know that there's no news in some affirmative fashion,
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
and be able to be confident in that.
Mr. Constant?
And then if we added the phrase "not less often than weekly," so we adopted.
I would be fine with that.
Mr. Rivera's language, and then at least weekly. Yeah.
Okay, so can you insert that into your language and then tell us how it reads, Mr. Rivera?
Sure. So the administration shall submit not less than weekly regular reports to the assembly. Here, I'll just start it again. The administration shall submit not less than weekly regular reports to the assembly on any emergency measures taken under AO 2020-85 as this public health emergency evolves.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I just want to make sure, I mean, this ordinance 2020-85 is just to extend it. What we really referring to is the emergency order.
Yeah, that's fine. We can change that.
Do we have a copy of the emergency order here? No, that's just the section of it, right?
The chair, not the signed version, but we do have it.
But the relevant portion is...
Yes, that's exactly right. You're missing the whereases.
And in that, is there a number or a title to it?
Proclamation of emergency.
Yeah, proclamation of emergency, and then in parentheses, COVID-19.
That's the one.
Yeah, so we'll just insert that rather than the AO. Hopefully the clerk got that.
Could you restate it for the clerk, please?
Sure. So the administration shall submit no less than weekly regular reports to the assembly on any emergency measures taken under the proclamation of emergency, parentheses, COVID-19, end parentheses, as this public health emergency evolves.
So for the mover, Ms. Zolotel, do you agree to that language?
Yes, well done, Mr. Rivera.
Mr. Weddleton is the second. Do you agree to that language?
Yes.
All right, so this time, could we please vote on the amendment to the amendment?
Is that amendment to the amendment? Need a second?
Yeah, what is it?
No, we've got it.
Yeah.
All right. Madam Clerk, do you want to take a
Yes,
vote on that amendment to the amendment?
So this is on the amendment after section 1.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
And Ms. Zolotel?
Yes.
The amendment is approved.
Thank you. So we're now back to the amendment as amended, which does two things. It changes the date to March 31st, and it, I'm not going to reread all that language, but it requires reporting. So is there any further discussion on this amendment? Mr. Bockenstadt and then Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, I just want to add on to some of the things that the mayor said, and I think one of the concerns that we have with changing the date to a much sooner date is that we are taking the position and the posture that this is going to be an emergency for the foreseeable future. And we don't want to give the public the sense that in 2 weeks, all of a sudden, we're going to be done. Now, this is going to be a long-term issue that we're going to be dealing with And the fact of the matter is, if we're providing weekly reports now at this point, why are we going to have to come back every 2 weeks if we're expecting this to last much longer? So I think if we're going to be providing weekly reports, extend it back out to April 14th so that we have the opportunity to continue to work this, continue to find resources, and make sure that we're protecting the public's health and safety.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I'm supporting the March 31st date because I was actually considering the next time we meet, which would be March 24th. So for me, this is a compromise. But in the very last whereas before the resolve section, there's the date of April the 14th written again.
We got that.
So you did get that one? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a note for the clerk, hopefully there are 2 instances we'll be changing both dates if it passes. Ms. Vogel and Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that there's a reason that the assembly meetings aren't regularly scheduled right before the election. One of the ordinances before you in this special meeting is about things that we can do to protect our election workers, and I think it's the same clerk's office that is very involved in getting ready for official assembly meetings. So the notion of mandating an assembly meeting on March 31st when we've already got a situation in our hand that is really calling on those resources, I think it's a really bad idea, and particularly where you've got reporting coming in, that particular date troubles me.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Mr. Constant.
So when this conversation started before this meeting, I had looked at the calendar and thought that April the 3rd was the natural day, which is the Friday before, and it's 3 full weeks after this action today. But I'm still not convinced that any extension past that time is what we as a body with the responsibility to the constituency in this city have. I think we need to keep our fingers on the pulse of this and not let it go too far. Not for lack of trust, but for being part of the process.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I agree with the municipal attorney. I think we're asking too much of the clerk's office. Putting on these elections is a very detailed situation, and we have a couple of clerks that are over at the election center all the time. I just think we're asking a little too much. I would much rather stay with the original date of April 14th, and if we move that date to April 31st, I'm a no-go on this.
March 31st.
Or March 31st.
March 31st, okay. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Chair. With the reporting, I don't think it's necessary to move it to March 31st, and I have the same concerns as Mr. Peterson, and how it would impact the clerk staff and the mayor's staff, to be honest, and all the work they're trying to do. With the regular reports, I feel okay with that. We could always call a special meeting if we need one and ask for them to be there. So I would appreciate bifurcating those 2 pieces so that I can vote yes on the reporting.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Okay,
President.
we have a motion to bifurcate, so then we will, okay, I think it's clear what that is. So we now have 2 amendments again before us. One dealing with the reporting requirement, one with setting the date. We'll take up the let's see. We'll take up the reporting first. I think actually we should take that one first. But I'm sure people want to take up the reporting first. So discussion on the reporting requirement. Okay. Madam Clerk, let's vote on the reporting requirement.
All right. Mr. Dunbar.
Yes.
Mr. Constant.
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy.
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance.
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla.
Yes.
Mr. Weddle.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yes.
Mr. Rivera.
Yes.
Ms. Salazar.
Yes.
The motion is approved.
Thank you. All right, so we are back to the other amendment, again, dealing with the date. Any further discussion? Mr. Weddle.
Briefly, I'm compelled by the arguments about the clerk's office and that we're getting weekly reports. I'm comfortable with the people.
Okay. Any other discussion on this item? Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just repeat what I said at the beginning of this discussion, which was my surprise that this would go so long without any reporting. And now that we do have the reporting, I feel more confident in the original April 14th date. And I would maybe just suggest if there were specific items, even though as Ms. Kennedy stated, it's hard to determine unless you know, but if there are specific items that I think the administration would be more than happy to report back on specifics in their less than weekly reporting.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Constant?
So I have been thrown on a grenade by the leadership, and apparently this item is going to fail, and I'm now going to tell a story of my day today. It's great communication. So I was attempting to share with my constituency, the thousands of people who listen to me, what was happening today. So I inquired, how does a member of the public, how do I personally tune in to the press conference when all of this was being announced so that I didn't have to go there myself and possibly get people sick? I was told KTUU will do it. And so I broadcast to my networks of people that one television station would be broadcasting the press conference. 2:30 rolled around and I searched and searched and searched and searched and could not find it. And then 10 minutes in, I finally found a link on KTVA. It was terribly embarrassing that I communicated to my constituency the wrong information that was handed to me by my friends in the administration. And so any argument that we should just wait months and months, weeks and months, because we're going to get great information is cold comfort when you want to make sure you get the best information to your people. Because the public is depending not just on you, but on us as well. And so I'm depending on you. I'm depending on you to consistently get good information so that I can do the same for my neighbors who are concerned about this. So I'll be happy to, on this item, withdraw this amendment that is about to fail.
Can I speak to it first?
Yes. We have to do better. We have to do better.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when I saw this resolution, and I saw this resolution about the same time my colleagues did, we had it emailed out as soon as it was completed. In a matter of hours, we called it an emergency meeting. And the thing that struck me most about this resolution, and it's all reasonable, and we don't want to slow down the administration, we want to work with the administration. But I had never seen a declaration. Granted, this is only the second time we've done this since we've been working together.
Sure.
Is that right? The earthquake? Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I believe this is the longest we've ever pushed it out. This is not as long as the homelessness one. It certainly felt a lot longer than the earthquake, and we are granting to you tremendous, extraordinary powers. And I have been accused at times, and perhaps my colleagues have as well, of being a rubber stamp for this administration. That we are writing you a blank check, and we don't hold you accountable enough. Now, in a time of emergency, we are working together, and I am not at all worried that if we were to go on the 19th the 31st, and have a special meeting, you would almost certainly get an extension. It strikes me as strange that you would react so negatively to the idea that in 3 weeks you would come back and do what we just did now. In less than an hour, we've been able to perhaps pass the resolution that we just saw for the first time 2 hours ago. So I think we have a good working relationship, but I don't want us to have to go and constantly go to the administration and ask for this information, or ask whether or not we should be reapproving this. I like having a date where we can agree you will come back, and then we will reapprove this and reaffirm this, and then we will be back behind it again. That all of us will be signed on again to extending these powers. So I for one would like to see the March 31st date, and I'll call a special meeting at that time if the amendment passes.
Actually, Mr. Chair, if I might, I'll speak first, please. I'll go after.
We actually have Ms. Zolotel in the queue, and then Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zalatel?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, so if we get a report and we decide we want to have a work session about something in the reports, is that also significant work for the clerk's office? Or is it kind of a wash? I mean, I kind of see this as being work regardless of if we call a meeting versus an assembly meeting on the 31st, knowing that we have an assembly meeting coming up in a couple of weeks' time to kind of review all the significant things unless there's some special action. Well, and then we would also be poised to potentially look at whether or not we needed to take any special action as well versus waiting a month and then kind of, I don't know, it just feels like if we wait till the 14th, we'll be catching up. But I would love to hear from the clerk's office about if it's a significant burden on them to have us meet on the 31st versus if we just end up in work session, because it still all has to be noticed.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Madam Clerk, do you want to speak to that?
Through the chair, I'm not going to speak as to whether it's work or not. That's a policy decision up to you and the administration. Special meetings are more work. They require an agenda. I'm taking minutes. They require different notice. They are different. Work sessions are just scheduled. So work sessions are less work for the clerk's office than a special meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Ms. Zalatel, do you really follow up to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're all traveling in uncharted territory right now, and I think that's what makes some of this sort of problematic, saying that, well, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do that. And I think to a certain extent, none of us can answer some of that right now. And I would just appreciate the idea of coming back together, because I think there's also an opportunity there to not only kind of reevaluate where we are and how we want to set the stage for the next maybe 60 days or 90 days. I mean, at that point, I would think we would all have a better handle of really where we're going to kind of go from here. Today, all this is new and very fresh, and we really don't have a good picture yet of where we need to go and what's going to happen. In a little less than 3 weeks, I think we will have that better picture, and we'll see kind of where we fall in those trends that we've seen from a lot of different other countries and what's happening there. But the other thing is, if we have the opportunity to get together and just focus on where we're at, we get the benefit of talking and hearing from each other. We get that chance not to just be getting all this information from the mayor's office or from the administration as a whole. We get a chance to say, well, this is what my community is dealing with. And I think there's value in that as well, in trying to figure out, okay, we're at this point in time, say March 31st, where should we now go from here? And like I said, maybe it is a 60-day or a 90-day or whatever expansion of this particular emergency declaration. So I would very much appreciate the idea of just really getting together and at that point being able to regroup a little bit, rethink some of this. Let's figure out really, now we've got a couple weeks behind us, let's figure out really where we want to go from here. And I think that time frame for that meeting would actually be crucial.
Yeah, and I'll notice, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I note also that if we pass the telephonic ordinance next week, we could theoretically have these meetings with the vast majority of us calling in rather than being physically present for obvious reasons. Mr. Constant, then Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Rivera.
I'll hold off for now.
All right, Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I mean, Ms. Kennedy makes a good point about that, but we could do that with a work session too, to reevaluate at any time. And that's actually a little more convenient format, I think, to the work session format. And less work for the staff. I mean, I agree. I think we should maybe not schedule it quite yet, but be thinking in that 3 weeks to have a work session. It may be a rules thing, just so we can talk amongst ourselves. Find
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I guess I had that same comment, but with the question at the end of it. So, would a work session suffice? Because then at that point we would be able to perhaps give additional guidance to the administration and see if, when this comes back to us as currently written on April 14th, if maybe there's an updated emergency proclamation for us to continue. So does that work in your perspective?
I think at this point, being part of the decision-making in this is important. It's not just a, let's get together and mull this over kind of thing. It asks us to make a decision, and I think that's important too.
Mr. Bockenstein.
I just want to put on the record that we actually went back and looked up what the previous emergencies resolution was extended. It was extended for 60 days with weekly reports.
Which one?
The homelessness one, the most recent one.
And how much was it originally put out for?
60 days.
60 days.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
The difference, though, between the homelessness emergency and this emergency is that this emergency has the possibility to directly impact the lives of 50, 70, 100% of the people living in our community. It is very dramatic, the possibilities that may come. And so there's a substantial difference between that and this. I think there's an order of magnitude of difference between that and this. It doesn't change, I think, the outcome of this conversation right now. We all support you in taking forward this act and making sure that we do the best of what we have. But I would ask now specifically to the chair to direct the clerk to schedule a work session for the 31st, to reserve that time so that we can convene, and if we decide we need to make an adjustment, change it from a work session to a special meeting in which we address the concerns. So if it's scheduled, then it kind of addresses the need because the time is reserved and we can know that it's there. Not just some random abstract, I may call it or will call it, but let's do that now.
Okay. Do folks have a preference on the time?
5 o'clock on a Friday.
No, this is Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday.
Oh, is it Friday?
That's
next week.
31st, I think, Tuesday.
Okay. Why don't we'll tentatively schedule that for, let's say, 1 p.m. on Tuesday the 31st. We'll schedule a work session for that time.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, one last note. It's interesting to think back on the emergency order for the homelessness issue. When we asked for the regular reports, it was harder for the administration to provide them because the work was going on and it was hard to keep track. And so I think we demonstrated some good faith in that process to not be hammering and saying it's the 7th day, where is our paper? And so I would imagine the same is going to be true now, that we'll be as flexible as we can while trying to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening from a distance.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Constant bring up some good points, and I guess they are all probably busy, which is why I don't see them here, but I don't see anyone from the health department here. And, I guess from my perspective, I would rely on the expertise there to determine what if circumstances do substantially change in a week and we do have to come back in a week. I would rely on their expertise to say, okay, it's time to call a meeting and for us to get that done. So I do like this idea of sort of the interim work session with the potential of it becoming a full-blown special meeting if circumstances dictate that.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Gates?
Yes, I know Sporong start the 1 hour work on debate for this one. I recommend motion to extend.
Can I get a motion to extend?
So moved.
Second.
Do we need a time?
How much time are you extending?
How much time are we extending?
We don't need it. Again, a ceiling, not a goal, but 30 minutes.
Okay. Any opposition to that? Motion to extend. Not seeing or hearing any, we've extended. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Okay, please vote on the amendment.
And, Mr. Chair, I understand this amendment has 2 parts. It's in the whereas and, we bifurcated that.
Yep.
So this amendment is for the amendment in the last whereas, and it's changing Tuesday, April 14th to Tuesday, March 31st.
We'd also changed that same date in section 1 after resolves.
Did you want to bifurcate that though?
Mr. Chair, just for the good of the order, I would rescind that motion if the seconder would. Let it be the 14th. We have a meeting planned on the 31st. Demonstrate we're all pulling together, just knowing full well that the intent is we want to be in the loop, not out of the loop.
Who was the second on that?
Might have been withdrawn. That's fine.
Okay, so that amendment is withdrawn. All right, and we're now down to the main resolution. Mr. Weddleton.
A couple things, and so I go in knowing what would be. So it says in this first part of the emergency proclamation, in consultation with the Office of Emergency Management, just which that's departments come together under that umbrella. Is that right? So which departments? I mean, who would that be? Jason's been there, Mayor.
Through the chair, I would say that part of what we're setting up is all of the departments are going to be involved over at the Office of Emergency Management, because they all will be impacted potentially by what happens with this virus.
Okay, so that's kind of shorthand for everybody, Department of Health, Public Works, everybody. Okay.
The Office of Emergency Management is configured to interface with the state, and that's why it in particular has a role in this circumstance.
That's fine. I just wanted to understand the bigger picture. And then, maybe Dean, you sent me a short email. Maybe you could review that for the Part 3, Chapter 7.15, 7.20, and 7.2090. I think if you just tell us all what was in that email, just so we know what those are.
Sure. Mr. Wood, asked whether the contents or summary of what is in Chapter 17 and 720 and 729. Chapter 715 is general contracting procedures. Chapter 720 is methods of source selection. It talks about the indication of the ROP, so source selection of special circumstances for contracting sources. 72090 is titled Emergency Procurements, and it sets forth municipality can award contracts for supplies and services and so forth. It requires that any contracts that are awarded under the emergency procurement that would normally require assembly approval have to be reported to the assembly within 2 weeks of that contract being entered. So you will get regular reports on which are supposed to approve anyway. That was done by emergency procurement.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And Mr. Constant?
So I have one last tiny amendment in the spirit of Mr. Weddleton. So it's in the first whereas. It should in fact read whereas a coronavirus, comma, COVID-19, because there are many coronaviruses.
Okay. I'm going to ask for unanimous consent on that.
I'll second.
Scrivener, yeah, there you go. Scrivener's there, kind of thing.
Substantial different meaning.
Fair enough. Any opposition to adding an A?
And then removing or.
No, I think that's fine.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
I have a suggestion.
Yes, Mr.
Whereas a novel coronavirus known as COVID-19, it's most commonly referred to as novel because it's a new, never before seen coronavirus part of the family.
Ms.
A question on that. I thought COVID-19 actually referred to the illness. So does it work in this phrasing?
The news reports I've seen are that was the name. It took about a month to come up with the name for.
That's the illness, it's not the virus, is my understanding. But, it's probably a minor point. We're all learning.
Yep.
New stuff.
Okay. So we'll now read whereas a novel coronavirus known as COVID-19, a respiratory disease, et cetera, any opposition to that amendment? All right, seeing and hearing none, that is adopted. We're back to the main motion. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote on this resolution. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Zolotow.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, let's see here.
Mr. Chair, can I ask?
Yeah, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
This isn't on the agenda, but before you adjourn, I was just wondering, or we can talk about it afterward, what the plan is for tomorrow. For work sessions, do we have an in-person quorum? I think we have work sessions from noon to 2. Should we dial in? Should we be here? What's our approach for tomorrow?
I don't believe we have do we have a quorum requirement with work sessions, Madam Clerk? Because we can't take action.
Mr. Chair, there is a requirement for a quorum at any meeting. The difference is that Mr. Gates and I have discussed this before. You could have an informational meeting, which is what a work session is, and since you don't take any action, you probably would not be required to have a quorum. But those are, and if that's in error, your action is void or voidable, but you don't take any action. So Mr. Gates may be able to explain that more legally than I have.
So I reached out to the members of the administration that were asking for the first work session regarding the youth, and I suggested that they cancel, but they wanted to go forward. So I haven't canceled that, and folks are free to attend or not attend. The other 2 work sessions are one on what is it? The one Title II, and then the other is on the emergency powers. I think the emergency powers work session in particular is.
I don't think there's an emergency powers tomorrow.
Oh, you move that one as well? Okay. Ms. Camacho?
They're both around.
Work session's been moved to the 20th, so
Okay.
next Friday.
Okay.
That hour covers both of the items that I introduced at the last meeting, the Title II changes and then the changes to the amount for appropriation. So I'm fine being here. I haven't heard from Dee that she isn't. She worked on one of them pretty extensively, actually both of them. And Dean will be here. I'll just come in person if it sounds like that's best.
Okay. And I plan to attend. If not, I will call in. And I think that's general guidance for folks is call in. If for any reason you don't feel comfortable coming in, please call in. And after next Friday, if we pass that ordinance, things will be a little bit easier to get a quorum, so we can actually take action as well. Are there any other additional assembly comments before we adjourn? Ms. Kennedy?
I was just going to point out that I just got a picture from my daughter of the Walmart in Eagle River, and apparently all the ramen noodle and pasta dishes are gone off the shelves, as are Kleenex, toilet paper, and paper towels, and the same is to be said for the Fred Meyer in Eagle River. So, whatever's going on, it's happening.
And Mr. Chair, if I can on that note, it was very interesting. I was similarly shopping today, and I got a picture from the Eagle River Fred Meyer, where in Anchorage, the store still has plenty on the shelf. So if Eagle River needs to, Anchorage is ready for them.
All right.
We're here.
That was wonderful.
That was at 3 o'clock.
All right, it's not on the agenda, but because we have time, if there's anyone from the public who would like to speak, you may do so. Audience participation? Yes.
My name is Eugene Haberman. 42 years Oscar resident, 20 years Anchorage resident, and Trinity Valley. Keep on amazed. I think I've seen everything. But where's the conversation with people before we make a decision tonight? This last item, even Member Dunbar made a comment about, they gave us this just an hour ago. You said that comment at 6:13. And remember your first meeting was together at 5 o'clock. With all the respect, you're not being respectful to the public. You're not being fair to the public. You can't expect them to be comfortable with your decision when you do not engage appropriately with the public. I plan to bring out what happened here to other meetings I go, particularly in the Valley, and remind you there's a substantial members of the Valley earn a living coming to Anchorage. They're customers here for many people here. So, where's the fairness? You know, if you gave some time and you heard from the people, how much time would you have been able to go through this stuff and figure out this was wrong, comment here, this and that? But you are not even dealing with the fairness of the administration and all that you call an emergency, but you're not even said, why do employees come to work sick in misspelled in Anchorage? Why do they go to meetings? It continues on happening. Do you need legislation to say, excuse me, you're sick, you shouldn't be in a public meeting? But you allow that. And is this going to change the situation because you put through an emergency order? Because you're not even doing common sense that people should be doing, and you should be doing, all of us should be doing. So I fear for the future. And one thing about this illness that's out there, this is not going to go away. The flu hasn't gone away, and it's been with us before I was born. And it's going to be here a long time. But how we handle this, and this one key thing on the President's address, and this is it. The fact is, we keep on isolating ourselves from the other parties around us. Show that in the address. This is not a U.S. problem, it's a world problem. Putting up a wall and isolating ourselves to keep people away and illness away, we should be working together with medical people around the world. And the key thing that's showing up in this situation is we don't even have enough tests for Americans to be tested for this thing. So we have a very nervous situation.
Thank you, sir.
Very
You've
nervous
reached your time.
situation
Would anyone
because
else, like to participate? Seeing no one, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjourned.
We're adjourned.